that is something that enables an ecosystem of silence, of complicity, of unchecked power, of violence at the end of the day that we're far from having tackled yet at the International Criminal Court.
No one can act with impunity.
These are crimes that are beyond the pale.
We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers.
We need a court. That's as simple as that.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. This episode was produced in partnership with justiceinfo.net.
All rise.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
So here we are on the morning of Monday, the 19th of May, recording not quite an emergency pod, but a pod that we have to do right now because yet again, as is its wont, we had dramatic news out of the International Criminal Court on a Friday afternoon about the prosecutor, Karim Khan, taking leave. And Steph, can you lay out what we know?
Before I explain what happened on Friday, we have to get a little bit of background and say that we've reported before also on this podcast about the external investigation into the prosecutor's alleged sexual misconduct. And what happened on Friday is that things got into a bit of a maelstrom because after reporting in the Wall Street Journal and on Dropside News on the weekend of May 10th, on this investigation into sexual misconduct and an additional story from the AP on Thursday on the impact of US sanctions against Karim Khan, I was kind of sitting around, casting around, doing a story about pressure mounting on Khan to step aside while the investigation is ongoing. And unexpectedly was told by one of my sources that Khan had announced to senior OTP leadership, OTP is Office of the Prosecutor, that he would take leave in an afternoon meeting and kind of immediately left the court, and that this leave would last until the end of the investigation process.
So let me pick up and give some of the details. We're not going to go into all of the details of what is being investigated, but I think it's important that people have some of them. It was towards the end of last year that the president of the Assembly of States Parties, that's the ASP, that's an acronym we'll come back to, that's the ICC's governing body, the states who have signed up to the court, she announced an external investigation into, quote, matters related to alleged misconduct by the ICC prosecutor, unquote. And the prosecutor, as this was made public, actually himself also publicly denied the allegations. And of course, we have to stress at this point that Karim Khan is presumed innocent until or unless there is actually a full result of this inquiry. Before I outline those details, there was also an internal inquiry according to the ICC's own initial rules and regulations by a body called the IOM, the Independent Oversight Mechanism. Again, another acronym that we'll be coming back to, that opened an inquiry into allegations that it had received and then closed the inquiry when it said that they could not be substantiated. It looked at that point from the report that the IOM did that there was a lack of cooperation from the alleged victim. As a result of pressure after that, the ASP president opened an external investigation, and that has been kind of trundling along in the background. But as you say, Steph, that investigation suddenly became very big news earlier this month as details from that investigation seem to be leaked to some journalists, and really they're quite explosive, and it's transformed the way that we see what is going on in this process. So let me just provide some of the details. And I'm just going to quote one part from Dropsite News describing what the journalist says was months-long grooming, psychological coercion and sexual advances, which eventually escalated into, quote, unwanted, unquote, and, quote, coerced, unquote, sex. And those quotes come, I understand from the reporting, directly from the alleged victim themselves. And this all lasted nearly a year and continued even after the alleged victim had told Karim Khan that his conduct had left her suicidal. So you, as a Reuters journalist, Steph, what have you been reporting around this, just to give a bit more context?
Reuters, of course, reported when this external investigation was announced. And we also reported in April that this investigation done by UN investigators of the Office of Internal Oversight, the OIOS, which we'll also be acronyming a lot, was also looking into allegations of retaliation by Karim Khan against people perceived to be supportive of the victim of those sexual misconduct allegations.
So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's really the media that's been pushing this story along. I've been told by diplomats that it's partly that media reporting that's made the prosecutor's position untenable, that states would have told him to step aside if he hadn't jumped himself at the end of last week. And why that? Because of this extraordinary nature of the reported allegations now being made public, and because of the atmosphere within the office of the prosecutor, which is preventing some of the work from going on. So again, I turn to you, Steph. What's it like, on the front line, being a journalist working on this?
Well, right off the bat, it's not the kind of story I like to write about when I'm writing about the ICC. Reporting on alleged sexual harassment and alleged forced sex acts is very complicated, also very fraught when you're dealing with sources who are telling you things, and also extremely complicated to get out. I don't know if many people realize how many editors and legal advice goes in this, but we have to lawyer up until the nth degree, have multiple sources for most things. And plus, this is a story that you can see when you start reporting on it, that there's only going to be losers probably in this. And so I prefer to report about the institutional handling of such complaints and alleged problems and mistakes with that. It's kind of like the Nixon thing, that reporting on the cover-up versus a crime, or alleged crime in this case. I have to be very careful. And one of the things that it is interesting for me is it's telling for me how many people inside the ICC are suddenly willing to talk to me about this. And that is extremely unusual for the prosecutor's office and this prosecutor's office. And I had several sources tell me that they were actually talking to me because they were feeling that the institution is not doing the right thing and is not really handling it properly and is only reacting when the media reports. So they have figured it out and are now talking to the media because in their minds, this is the way that the needle moves forward.
So what we're going to do with this pod is really look at some of the institutional challenges as a result of this, because we can see that there are things that are going wrong, and we would like to understand basically what now is the process and what we can expect to come out of it in the future. So just to say to anybody, we will not be going back into any of the details of any of the allegations, so find your own sources for that if that's what you are interested in. We are instead joined by two friends of the pod. Let me introduce first Alix Vuillemin, who's the head of Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice in The Hague. Hi, Alix.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
And we have also with us Danya Chaikel from the FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights, and she is the FIDH representative to the ICC. Hi, Danya.
Thanks so much.
So the reason why we asked both of you, Alix and Danya, not only because, as we'll mention, I'm sure, as we go along, you've been on the pod talking about this kind of stuff before, but you jointly wrote a letter, I believe, on behalf of a range of civil society organisations saying that Karim Khan would need to step aside. So, Alix first, has Karim Khan done the right thing now?
Thank you, Janet. Yes, he has. Yes, he has. The standard should be really quite straightforward. When someone faces such credible allegations of this nature, they should step down or be asked to do so. Particularly in this context, particularly because he is the prosecutor, particularly because this is the International Criminal Court, continuing to serve in full capacity while under investigation. There's so many facets to why somebody needs to step aside. You mentioned already staff morale. There's the court's credibility. And in doing so, I mean, there is the real perceived risk of interference, there is retaliation, there's additional harm to all of those involved. So, in short, yes, he has done the right thing. We would have loved for him to do so 6 months ago, as we called for him to do so then. But this is where we are now, and now we need to look forward.
Danya, do you want to come in here? Because as Alix said, there were calls for him to step aside sooner, and he has now stepped aside, but only after we've reported that the final interviews of this investigation were done. So
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with Alix. It is really standard practice when such serious allegations of sexual misconduct are made against a senior official across industries that the individual voluntarily takes leave. And there's so many reasons, as Alix pointed out, but it's really meant to make sure the investigation is unhindered, that it's fair for the prosecutor himself, and of course for the alleged victim and whistleblowers who might be afraid, and others who might be, not wanting to go forward or speak to investigators when the person, whether positive or negative, is still in the office and they're working with them. So it's just the sort of logical thing that they step aside. And we definitely asked for it to happen then. And we would even go as far as saying, because it didn't happen, that could be why things have gotten so much worse and why maybe, as you mentioned, so many staff have come forward to journalists. It does seem very strange. We've never seen this before. And they might be feeling that, nothing has happened, and that the calls for him to step down, by the way, have been reportedly happening by many members of the office and court and others. So this isn't just from NGOs, it's from many stakeholders and really staff that work with the prosecutor. It doesn't at all speak to his guilt or whether any of these facts are true. It just means that we want to have a very unhindered and fair process and make sure the investigation can take place without people that are involved still working and walking in the hallways while investigators are potentially there.
In terms of the kind of fairness of the process, I mean, it has been reported that there are allegations of intimidation against those who have made the initial reports. And then we've got the counter also of allegations that this may be part of some kind of wider smear campaign. I mean, it makes it all incredibly complicated, doesn't it? Presumably, you would expect an investigation to look at those variety of allegations as well and provide a full picture, not just to narrowly look at one allegation of, or let's say a series of allegations from one individual around sexual misconduct. Alix?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this whole scandal, if I may call it this, has been having so many facets. It's been politicized, it's been weaponized. And because of that, and because of the process not being very clear, and we're calling on the state's parties to make sure that that happens now. But because this process hasn't been clear, because there wasn't sufficient transparency, we say there was so much openness for it being, for this whole story to be taken and to be run with for all sorts of purposes. And that is regrettable, to say the least, that it wasn't acted upon immediately, that the stepping aside wasn't done earlier, that the process discussions wasn't done earlier, because as Danya indicates, but as you said before yourselves as well, it really took a huge involvement of the media, and it took for lurid details to emerge, for finally something to move forward. And that has engendered such damage, really, to the court, to staff morale. Let's also not forget that there are people in the midst of this, caught up in this entire story, that needed protection, that need protection, whistleblowers, alleged complainants, the prosecutor himself, etc. So this is a very unfortunate indeed mixing up of all sorts of stories, all sorts of arguments, and all sorts of politicization.
Do you want to add anything in, Danya?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's what's so unbelievable about all of the developments and all of the allegations. It comes in the middle of so much turmoil for the ICC, the crisis, as we keep hearing, the existential crisis, attacks every day. We hear of new threats from Israel, from the United States, from Russia, and so on. And it's very difficult to sort out all of these different, unbelievable, really, stories and allegations, and also unbelievable that a prosecutor might be sanctioned by the United States and at the same time face these very serious allegations, indeed, of alleged sexual misconduct and witness retaliation. So they are both being investigated from the start. And I see a lot of comments on LinkedIn and social media about this. And obviously, it has to be that this is a plot against him. And, it's impossible that he was somehow using the investigation against Palestine or obviously this or obviously not. And we must consider his due process and presumption of innocence. And I mean, I just stepping back, all of these can be true at the same time. There's the presumption of innocence. There needs to be victim-centered approach to any complainant and a really safety for whistleblowers and make sure that they are protected. Also, there are these threats and attacks directly on the court. Also, so they're not binary. It doesn't mean that one erases the other. And so I think that would be a good starting point, that we just sort of step back and say, wow, this is absolutely incredible. It's hard to believe. It seems like a movie, but we need to let the investigators do their job. And what I've heard, it's a very comprehensive and strong investigation, and let that all play out. And absolutely, if there's any other credible allegations, they absolutely should be investigated too.
One of the things that I also see in all those pundits, and this is more my observation, but I'm sure you've seen the same, that they conflate the prosecutor with the investigation very much. So the idea is, if it turns out that something will come out of this investigation, it will somehow nullify the arrest warrants issued against Israeli officials. The office of the prosecutor is huge. There are very many very talented lawyers working on these things for years and years. And I really don't think that you could kind of make up these charges just to kind of get attention from it and then get all these judges to sign off on it as well. And these senior prosecutors will have to prepare all those. Yes, it's Karim Khan's signature under the request for arrest warrants, but the team that works on that is very large and also very knowledgeable. So it's just also that this kind of rejoicing that if we've removed them, then now the court is not going to do anything about Palestine. That probably isn't quite true. There is a whole team that does these things. This is how this works. You see only that guy, but that guy is not the only one doing it.
Absolutely. If I could add one little point, that's what we've been also, very much stressing, that no individual represents the court, no staff member, including the prosecutor. Absolutely amazing. I've worked at the court, talented, dedicated, independent lawyers and analysts and investigators who have done all this work. And moreover, there's been this conflation or misunderstanding of the reporting, whether it's true or not, that exactly what you said, that the prosecutor, the whole investigation was to somehow link to the allegations of sexual misconduct against him. And in fact, that what the article says is, no, it's the very last step where the prosecutor decided to apply for arrest warrants last May. It's only alleging that the timing of when that happened might have been, or reportedly was impacted by him hearing about the misconduct allegations against him. And that's a very different story from, the whole investigation is tainted. Nothing at all points to any issues with the investigation, that it's sound, it's been conducted well, and the pretrial chamber, as you say, have authorized those arrests.
Alix, did you want to add?
Yeah, I do wish to add, I couldn't have said it much better. The office of the prosecutor is not embodied by a single individual. It is called the office of the prosecutor. I get that. And there is a great symbolic and real power in that function. However, as Danya just said, Khan is supported by two very competent deputies who are taking over now. And the office is staffed by professionals who are extremely dedicated, diligent, and have the highest expertise in this field. And so the arrest warrants against Netanyahu, but also against Putin, against Duterte, do not equate what happens with the person that holds the position and the office right now. But this all may sort of point to a larger culture within the ICC that I'd be happy to discuss also with you a little bit with regards to the culture of the one person being the symbol for the entire organization and a much broader workplace culture that really comes to light here as well, thanks to this situation with this scandal.
Just one small footnote to that. The reporting of this investigation and the arrest warrant timing being linked to the Netanyahu arrest warrant was mainly carried out by one medium, the Wall Street Journal, and is not repeated by others and also not by Reuters. And Alix, you were talking about the culture at the ICC and the wider bits. We've talked to you both before, and we had a chat before Karim Khan was elected to prosecutor, just in general about the election of the prosecutor at the ICC and the mechanisms in place to secure that elected officials and especially the prosecutor were in line with the governing statute, which says that they should be of high moral character. These are all these safeguards. You were working very hard to get them in place. Are they now in place, and were they at the time that he was elected?
Can I first maybe reflect a little bit on the culture or the wider issues that we're looking at now, because this is not necessarily an isolated incident, right? Or this is not an isolated situation that we're finding ourselves in with regards to the ICC. Very much not in a vacuum. I would even say that there's a lot to be said here, and maybe we can do a separate pod about this, but there is a web of enabling circumstances, particularly at the International Criminal Court, from both inside as outside of the institution. And there are systemic failures here that really come to light. 5 years ago, we've discussed it so often already. There was an independent expert review of the workings of the International Criminal Court, and it identified already serious concerns regarding the court's workplace culture, including bullying, harassment, discrimination, retaliation against staff who spoke out, and warned about deeply rooted dysfunctions in internal accountability structures, which have yet, say, years later, have to be meaningfully addressed. So these are not isolated incidents. This incident of the allegations against the prosecutor made now, and many others as well. This really shows some structural features of, I say, deeply gendered and so often also racialized systems that protect the most powerful, that enable this culture of the one person embodying an entire office that is staffed by hundreds of people, embodying the arrest warrants, the hope for some measure of accountability and justice for so many victims in indeed all of these situations. And that is something that enables an ecosystem of silence, of complicity, of unchecked power, of violence at the end of the day, that we're far from having tackled yet at the International Criminal Court. And when I say we, it's us, it's the media, we're all part of it, right? It's the state's parties, it's the ICC itself. And that is something that really needs to be tackled once we are out of the woods on this scandal and moving forward. And then, Danya, please, if you have something to add to this.
Yeah, no, both. I'd really like to add on to what Alix just said, because I looked again at the IER report, and there's at least 17 recommendations, at least 17 that deal with workplace culture on like bullying, harassment, abuse of authority, and structural sexism. I mean, the retaliation against whistleblowers, lack of transparency in outcomes. And exactly because this hasn't been fully addressed, it is no surprise we're here today. It is no surprise. And by the way, there have been other investigations against elected officials in the past year and outcomes, which we only know some information about. But this is very much still an issue. And I would argue even worse today than it was then, having spoken to a lot of staff members. And there's going to be the biggest ever staff survey released soon. And we will know a lot more about the current atmosphere and feeling. But, you know, I've had diplomats ask me in meetings, you know, we did implement a lot. We have a gender focal point. We have a lot of training. We thought a lot had happened. Why are there still all of these problems and allegations? And the IOM's reports are full of cases. And, you know, I just was very frank about it. And again, this can be for another discussion, but the underlying culture, the sexism, the old boys club, the management of all the middle, upper, and senior management issues have not been addressed at all. I'm going to be frank. And words are not enough. You cannot have zero tolerance. You cannot say that and then not do it in practice. So there's so much more to be said about that, and the legal profession in general, which feeds, of course, most of the staff there. A lot of them are lawyers, and it's a huge problem in our field. But I wanted to then go back to the question that you asked, which was about the election itself in 2020, right? 2020. So yeah, there was this huge issue, which many of us focused on, and the Article 42.3, which states that the prosecutor must be of a high moral character. And I think the question you're asking is, okay, now, many years later, just over a year ago, the ASP finally have adopted a permanent due process or vetting process, which was really driven by civil society, I have to say, in order to vet elected candidates. Before that, there weren't even criminal record checks, let alone any process in place to address serious allegations of misconduct against candidates. Those are judicial candidates, prosecutorial, and the registrar and deputy prosecutors. But back then, when prosecutor was in that election, when he was running, there was no vetting process. That's the problem. I'm not saying that the facts today are true. I'm just saying that the problem then was that there was no process. And we know from everything that happened and allegations that surfaced about different candidates that it led to where we are today. And different, there were ad hoc vetting processes, and now we have a permanent one. So it hasn't been applied yet, but it will for the future. And the idea is that the IOM, the independent oversight mechanism within the court, which handles normally harassment allegations and does investigations of those, there will be a way to report to them any allegations, and they will review those and share their findings with states before there's a vote, an election.
Can I contextualize with something that Danya just said? The reason that we didn't have a vetting process 5 years ago, nor a definition of the standard of high moral character, leads us to this situation of the overall working culture, not necessarily the allegations that we're facing now. Just a little side note there.
Thank you.
And I wanted to say one thing, that the definition that was finally adopted for it, just to add something, because the point being, of course, is there misconduct? And that's very much related to where we are today. Was there misconduct that might mean that the candidate does not have high moral character? And so there's a footnote that defines it for the current process. For the purpose of this due diligence procedure, misconduct or rights violations, incidents in the workplace, or in connection with work of harassment, including sexual harassment, abuse of authority, discrimination, and bullying, as well as other ethical or legal breaches of a serious nature, such as fraud or corruption. So it's very much related to where we are today. And we actually argued very hard for that. The definition included outside of work, which they were very happy included, because of course it wasn't always. So there could be misconduct, say, when someone is volunteering somewhere or outside of the workplace. So all of that is now included.
Yes, we're definitely going to have to come back and do more pods on this, because this is obviously a really crucial area. But let's just talk again about the current process. We have a very short statement released to journalists. I understand there was also something that was sent to members of staff in the OTP. And then we have a statement from the head of the Assembly of States Parties saying that Karim Khan has taken leave until the, quote, end of the process, unquote. I mean, does that mean the end of the investigation? What is the process, and how do we know when it ends?
We won't know when it ends until when it ends, actually. That's very clear, and that is the prerogative of the OIOS, as you indicated, who is now conducting an investigation. And that investigation will be to determine findings. And Danya will be able to much more eloquently explain to you what the process is and how it is going to go forward, but we won't know. And that is something that is important, because we are advocating very hard for the Assembly of States Parties to make very sure that the process is established and known before the report of the OIOS is out, so that there is no confusion and no conflation of how the process should look based on the findings of the OIOS.
Danya, you were given the ball, so you have to run with it now. Tell us in extensive detail, and please take at least an hour to explain the process to us. Or rather, please just take a few minutes.
I might need 3. Yeah, I mean, just the question about the end of the process, that is the $1 million question. And that if it's just the OIOS investigation, this is the initial step. And if the leave is only during that period, it could be a matter of weeks that the prosecutor decides, I do not know the parameters of his leave. I do not know if he's being paid. We don't know what the end of the process means. But if it is the end of the investigation, that could be very, very soon. Or the next step, and I'll go into it, I mean, then, there needs to be a legal assessment of the factual findings. There needs to be the body in charge, which will likely be the Bureau of the ASP, the 21 states parties that are the oversight of the governing part of the oversight body. Then they will have to decide on potential disciplinary actions or even the potential removal from office. And then, of course, after all of that is said and done, if it happens, if they decide that the facts warrant that, then, of course, either the prosecutor or the complainant can appeal, and that can go to a higher UN body. So just to say that I'm not saying it's years, but there isn't really a clear idea of how long this could take, the whole process. And I think in terms of the leave, we would still argue if it's only intended to be until the end of the investigation, if the report of the OIOS indicates that any of the facts have been substantiated, that the leave should continue. And if it's not voluntarily continued, that the Bureau of the ASP should initiate a process for temporary suspension. If it's not substantiated and there's more happening, of course, the prosecutor should very much go back to his role, and then we go forward from there. But otherwise, I think if it's going to be at the extreme level, a vote, a secret ballot by the states, which we'll get into for his removal, during that process, he should remain on leave to make sure the investigations of core international crimes can go on unhindered.
The one thing we've heard publicly about what would happen with the findings of the OIOS investigation is this statement from the president of the Assembly of States Parties, which says the findings will be handled in a, quote, transparent manner. And then she adds, in accordance with the Rome Statute and the legal framework of the court. But the question is, what is the legal framework of the court? Because this is an outside investigation that is, as I understand it, also outside kind of the framework of the court, because the court has the IOM for these kinds of investigations, which did not or opened an investigation and then closed it after reports from whistleblowers. And after there were reports on that, the court moved to this external investigation. So is there a legal framework for dealing with alleged harassment from elected officials at the court? And what could happen if these allegations are substantiated?
Another $1 million question.
Yeah, another triple or billion-dollar question. I mean, it's a very complicated question and being dealt with actually right now by states parties for future investigations. But absolutely, the framework is quite elaborate and touches on many different documents within the court's legal framework. And even though it is the OIOS, what I have discovered in all of our research and discussions with people is that until the IOM was functioning, the IOS did already carry out investigations for the court and for states. So it's not completely new, but while the president is giving away the answer, I mean, they are following the court's legal framework, and they have to, other than that part, the fact-finding part, which is really critically important part, but it is the very, very first stage, which I think a lot of people don't understand. They kind of think that some kind of hearing or real assessment is taking place, and it's not. This is very much done by investigators, and just like in any other administrative law procedure or criminal procedure, the investigators themselves aren't deciding anything or conducting any discipline. So, like I said, there's a huge array of documents. I mean, we have the Rome Statute, the rules of procedure and evidence, but there's also the staff rules and regulations and the regulations of the court all touch on it. There's also many administrative issuances and presidential directives, and several came in very recently. The one from a few years ago on addressing discrimination, harassment, including sexual harassment and abuse of authority. But there's others on whistleblower protections and how to even investigate unsatisfactory conduct. And there's also separate codes of conduct for staff, but also the Office of the Prosecutor. They have a code of conduct. So all of these come into play. And I've tried to look at a lot of it, but at the top level, of course, we have the Rome Statute. And there are two relevant articles, Article 46 and Article 47. So we hear most commentary about Article 46, which is the removal from office. And that sets out the different reasons for removal of the elected officials, a judge, a prosecutor, deputy prosecutor, registrar, or deputy registrar, when we used to have those. And it has to be of a very serious nature. And I just wanted to raise very briefly, though, Article 47, because it hasn't been mentioned, and it is for disciplinary measures against senior ICC officials for misconduct of a less serious nature. And it hasn't been mentioned, so maybe it doesn't come into play, but it might. And that would have a different process. And that would involve other kind of disciplinary measures, like your salary being deducted, etc. So just to mention it, because there are the two options, and that has a whole other set of relevant rules and regulations, but there are similar processes for both, like around due process and the safeguards that are in place. There's another document which we've discovered, which is really interesting and helpful, is the ASP's own rules of procedure and evidence. And it's also not spoken about that often, but Rule 81 is very helpful because it's about the removal, and it clearly says, because people have said, well, who will do what, that basically the presidency of, notably, this is for when the IOM would normally do investigation. But in that case, they would then send their results to the relevant decision maker. So maybe the presidency of the ICC or the prosecutor, if it was about the deputy prosecutor, and it sets out then the next steps. So the next step is, I wanted to raise Article 81 too, which refers to due process, because that's critically important. The Bureau, if it is about the prosecutor, he has to be heard by the Bureau. If it's of a serious complaint of a nature within Rule 28 of the RPE, and that also relates to the removal of office. But I did a little bit of digging on Rule 28 as well. And what's really interesting is that it was very contentious when it was being drafted. And whether or not, what does this mean that the person has the full opportunity, what the sub-rule 2 in Rule 27 says, to present and receive evidence, to make written submissions, and to supply answers to any questions put to him or her. So this would be the Bureau in the case of Article 46. Article 46 defines that, and I'm learning this as I go, but I wanted to stress that it is very much a part of the process, and we know that states are figuring out how to do this. But in the end, when states were drafting this, they favored not a hearing, so that's something very interesting, but rather that only written submissions can take place. And otherwise the person, so the prosecutor, if this ended up happening, would not otherwise participate in the consideration of the matter. So it's going to be a matter of not speaking with, but only submitting some written documents or response to the allegations in the report, which I think is really important.
Just before Steph says anything, I just want to point out to those, because nobody can see this podcast, as soon as Danya started talking about relevant portions of the Rome Statute, I saw Steph's hand reach out to pick up her copy of the Rome Statute and to start to follow along. And I'm sure we will have many lawyers who will be doing the same while they're listening to you, Danya, trying to find, and we'll put into our notes as many of the links as we can so that people can follow along what I find quite convoluted discussion that you just had, but I'm going to try and track down all of those bits now and see if I can understand it. Steph?
I just want to say that Danya talks about the Bureau of the ASP, and I guess a lot of people who don't have to deal with the ASP on a regular basis would know what that is. That's about 20 states. This is a kind of a smaller committee of states that deal with kind of the day-to-day handling of the Assembly of State Parties, and they rotate. And of course, there's 125 ICC members, and they all make decisions once a year at the ASP meeting that Janet and I like to roam the halls to get to talk to people. But that's just what the Bureau does.
I think it's 21.
I was going to say,
Around 20.
But also we should mention the presidency, which isn't just the president, who's the current president is Finnish, but she is also supported by her vice president. So they make up a presidency of 3. So we have a variety of different potential levels of engagement with this. But yeah, it's just full of lawyers and they're going to lawyer it. I'm sure the whole thing is going to be very, very lawyered. But underlying it is going to be, as I think as Danya has made it clear, it's still a work in process. I mean, it is not clear.
Well, I didn't get to the main. Yeah, it is very complicated and I'm trying to articulate it well, but I'm learning it as I go. And I do think we need to publish something short with all of the different avenues. But just backing up, when the report is issued, this is very important. We understand that it will include factual findings, again, not a legal assessment. So it probably, I mean, we're quite sure it will not, for example, indicate that the allegations amount to anything, including misconduct. So where do you go from there? Who will then make that assessment? And I'm raising it because states in the IER report, which we talked about, this was already noticed and it was very much an issue. So currently, in fact, states within working groups of the ASP are addressing it, and they are implementing one of the recommendations in the IER to have ad hoc external panels of prosecutors and judges that will, after the IOM normally should investigate allegations against elected officials. After that, they will then, I'm just reading it, they will advise to the decision maker, which is the Bureau, on the removal of office or disciplinary matters, which I just mentioned. And one of their main roles will be to determine whether the facts established by the investigation amounts to serious misconduct, warranting removal, or other misconduct justifying a disciplinary measure, which was the Article 47 I mentioned, based on the Rome Statute and RPE. So the point being, it's been identified by leading experts. States agreed. It's in part because actually the expert said the panel should do the entire investigation, but instead it will review the IOM's internal investigation, and then to add a level of very important independence and clarity, they will then assess it, the legal aspects, and then make a recommendation to the Bureau. So right now the Bureau doesn't have that, and they need to decide how they're going to fill that gap. And that's really critically important right now before the report is going to be issued and we understand it is being dealt with. So that's the big gap. Very quickly, we've identified lots of gaps like this, and the silver lining of all this, not just to address what we now see as huge issues around misconduct and fear of reporting and retaliation generally at the court, but also that it's a chance to look at the whole framework and make sure it is, there aren't big gaps, and that it's very clear to everyone when they have an issue with whoever that they can report it. I mean, I do one more point. The recent hearing of a defense counsel that was a week long in public, and all of the allegations were out in the open for everyone to see and hear, and they knew very well who this leading defense counsel was. The contrast between that and the secrecy of the process and indeed no hearing at all for elected officials is very glaring, and it's noted by states and it comes up in discussion. So that's another issue that has to be addressed because of the inequity. And while there are different processes for external counsel, of course, this is just a huge difference. And I would definitely say is not fair. And maybe one is too transparent and one is not transparent enough.
I was been checking back through my stories around what's been going on at the ICC, and I find that I keep on coming up with metaphors around the weather, clouded skies. I've got one about storms coming out this week, etc., etc. I mean, I just think, this just keeps going on. Steph, do you agree?
Yes, I don't use many of the sky metaphors. I think I'm not allowed to, as per the Writer's Handbook. But we are always talking about doing podcasts with our ICC, and this is one of those wither things as well. But I also feel that we have been talking about this for years and years, at least 5 years, with Danya and Alix about this idea of when there are allegations against court staff, how to make them accountable. And I think it's a counterbalance to the kind of criticism that the media gets for reporting on this thing from the prosecutor when there's more important things and wars going on that they could issue indictments for. I do think there's an argument to be made that if you are, the International Permanent War Crimes Court that is supposed to deliver accountability and justice for people, that it is kind of evident that you should also ensure in your own institutions that there are ways for accountability and justice for people who feel that officials of the court have done something to them, and that there should be a clear system, because there is a clear system for the things that you investigate. Interrupting our regular programming just to say, please come and support us on Patreon and get our newsletter. For the price of just a cup of coffee, you can hear Janet and me talk even more about war crimes and books that we like to read and music that we like to read and what we are doing. Come and follow us and support the show. Thank you. So we're going to round this up, but we always ask about your favorite books, podcasts, movies, and the things that you're reading, watching, listening to. And I know you're both eager to talk about it. So let's hear your recommendations. We'll start with Danya.
I am excited because, in fact, I'm not reading it. I'm about to, as when it arrives at my door, read a book by a fellow book clubber in The Hague. And she, in fact, used to work for the OTP. So that's why it's really relevant and amazing. And the name that is used for it is Elizabeth Dini, and it's called Bearer of Bad News. And it's a little bit related to international justice, but it's more of a dark humor, mystery. Yeah, so it's very much a lighter read. It's compared to Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. That's a book we also read a few years ago in our book club, but just amazing. So she's quit being a lawyer and become a full-time writer and was published successfully. I had to plug it a little bit because she's very modest, and we're so happy that she got picked up and published.
Alix.
Thank you. Very happy to share something that I've shared before. So I'm cheating here a little bit, but it has since been turned into a series that has been done very well. So let me restate that my recommendation for also a bit of a lighter read is The Power by Naomi Alderman. And the reason why I keep mentioning this is because it very much challenges all of our ingrained views about gender. And it helped me so much flip it completely on its head and really see the reasons why we are still working on these issues, why we have such ingrained ideas and preconceptions and assumptions. So I would very much encourage all the listeners to either read or go watch the excellent series.
Oh, lovely. I love that book. Good to know that there's a series being made of it.
We are going to reserve the right to bring you back in, Alix and Danya, as things get clearer again over the next few months, because this is a story that's not going away. But thank you so much for making time early on a Monday morning to try to elucidate how we got here and what we might expect next.
Thank you both so very much for having us.
Yes, absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie Vandenberg. This episode was created in partnership with justiceinfo.net, an independent site covering justice efforts for mass violence, and with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.